Today we're going to be building arguably the most famous overdrive circuit ever created, the TS808 Tube Screamer. We'll be creating this iconic circuit on the breadboard, and I will walk you through each section. With a little patience and some basic components, you can create this legendary guitar effect circuit for yourself. Now let's get right into the build. Welcome back to another breadboard tutorial, and today we're going to be doing the TS808 Tube Screamer. We have the various sections laid out for us, so we're just going to go one by one. Hopefully you're able to follow along. So we're going to start on the power section right here, and then we're going to move into our input and output buffer, gain and clipping, and then finally our tone and volume. So let's get started on that power section. I've already gone ahead and hooked up my power and ground rails for both top and bottom. This is going to be a fairly large circuit, so having both top and bottom that we can use for power and ground is going to be really helpful for us. So the first thing that we're going to do is grab our D3 diode, and this is going to just be some reverse polarity protection for us in our power supply, and then we're going to also add a 1 UF electrolytic capacitor to our 9-volt to ground. And this really just helps stabilize any ripples in the power supply, as well as this 47 UF cap down here, but we'll get to this in just a second. So I'm gonna grab my diode, and I'm gonna have the little ribbon side in my power section, and then the other leg will go to ground. So to make sure this little stripe is in the power, and then the other leg is at ground. I'm gonna grab my 100 UF electrolytic cap, and just make sure the shorter leg, or the leg with the little graphic, is going to be in ground as well. So I'm just gonna pop this in just like that. So like I just said, the longer leg is going to be in the 9-volt power rail, and then the shorter leg is gonna be in ground. The next thing that I'm going to do is set up our voltage divider. So it's gonna use two 10K resistors and then a 47 UF cap to stabilize the power. And then right here where they meet, it's going to give us our 4.5 volt virtual ground that we're going to use throughout the rest of the circuit. So I'm going to take one 10K resistor, and put it into one leg in power, one leg in this row. I'm going to grab my other 10K resistor. This time one leg is going to be in the ground, and the other leg is going to be in that same row. Just like this. So these legs are touching in the same row. One is coming from the 9-volt power, one is going to ground. Finally, I'm going to add this 47 UF cap in that same row where the two 10K resistors meet. And then again, this is an electrolytic cap, so just make sure the short leg is going to ground. So if I grab my multimeter and I go ahead and probe this rail, we should see about 4.5 volts. So that's perfect. The last thing that we have to do for this power section is actually hook up the power and ground to our op amp, and then add this 100 NF cap across those pins. I'm going to add my op amp to the board like this. Just make sure it's seated in there well and none of the legs got bent. And like I just said, I have to add power and ground to the op amp. So pin number 8, this last pin right here, is going to go into my 9-volt power through this small jumper. And then ground, which is our pin number 4, just like that. So small jumper from pin number 4 to ground, small jumper from 9-volt power to pin number 8. And if we just quickly review our schematic, we just created all of these connections. So now we're going to move into the input and output buffer. For the input buffer, I'm going to just begin by adding my transistor somewhere over in this area. So really the purpose of this input buffer is to provide a high input impedance. So we preserve the signal integrity coming from our guitar, and we don't lose any of those like high frequencies, which would muddy up our tone a little bit. So I just went ahead and added my transistor right here. So the next thing I'm going to add is this 22N cap and this 1K resistor in series. And as we can see here, this is where our guitar signal is going to be entering our circuit. So just a little bit further over here, I'm going to add my 22N cap. And I'm going to grab my 1K resistor. And this is going to be going into the base of my transistor. Okay. So 22NF cap, 1K resistor in series, going into the base, which is the middle leg of our transistor right here. Coming back to the schematic, we have 9 volts going into the collector. And we also have a 10K resistor from the emitter going to ground. So I'll quickly add that. So our collector leg is this rightmost leg, and I'm just going to connect it straight to our power rail using a small jumper. And then I'm going to grab a 10K resistor, and coming from our emitter leg, or the leftmost leg, going to ground. So now we have something that looks like this. And the last thing that we have to do is set up this 470K resistor that is coming from our virtual ground that we created over here in our power section. So we need to get this reference voltage over here. So I'm going to use a jumper, and I'm going to jump our reference voltage over into this row. And we're probably going to end up using this later down the line where we have to connect our op amp to this reference voltage in the clipping and tone section. So I'm going to take my 470K resistor, and coming off of this row where the 4.5 volt virtual ground is, this resistor goes into the base of our transistor. So right here, 4.5 volts through the 470K into that middle leg of our transistor. So now I'm going to start working on this output buffer, which is very similar to this input buffer. And that way, when we finish our tone and volume section, we already have this set up for us, and we can test the circuit right away. So I'm going to add a 100 NF cap over here on this lower part of the breadboard just to get some new rows going. So this leg is ultimately going to receive the signal from the wiper lug of our volume pot. But we'll just leave it in this row for now. So this 100N resistor is connected to the base of our transistor. There we go. So that leg is in the same row as our left leg of our cap. And then just like the input buffer, we need to add 9 volts to the collector leg. And I'm just going to do that with this jumper right there. Collector leg is that right leg right there. We have to add that 10K resistor from the emitter leg to ground. And then additionally, we have to add this 470K resistor to the base that comes from that 4.5 volt virtual ground, just like over here in the input section. So I'm going to grab another jumper wire, and I'm going to jump across the breadboard like that. So this is the row with the 4.5 volts. So I'm just jumping it down into this row right here, so I can use that row as our 4.5 volt reference. So I'm going to grab my 470K resistor, then coming off that row with the 4.5 volt reference, I'm going into my base. So here's my row with the 4.5 volts, and then this is going into that middle leg of our transistor. So very similar so far to our input buffer. Coming out of the emitter leg, we have a 100 ohm resistor into a 10 UF cap into a 10K shunt to ground, and then this will be our effect out. Here's my 1K resistor coming out of the emitter leg, and the emitter leg is this leftmost leg. So I just put that 100 ohm resistor in the same row as that emitter leg, and then it is a 10 UF cap, making sure that it is touching the positive leg here and then the negative leg over here. Then we have a 10K resistor coming off of this negative leg to ground. And then finally, right here in this row is going to be our effect output. So I'm just going to hook that up to our output right now. So that is the power, the input, and output buffer sections complete. And at this point, we can just go ahead and test it to make sure we have our buffers set up. And how we're going to do that is by attaching our guitar input into this 22 NF cap. And then I'm going to be coming out of the emitter leg of our input buffer, which is that left leg. And then this will be going into the 100 NF cap right here. So I'm expecting pretty much no difference in my guitar tone between off and on. This is simply just making sure that we have everything wired up correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and test it right now. All right, so hopefully you were able to hear that. I could hear my guitar signal coming through right there. So that means everything up to this point should be working the way we expect. So without any further delay, let's get right into this gain and clipping section. All right, so our input buffer out is that emitter leg right here in the input buffer, and we're going to be going into a 1UF cap. And then we have a 10K resistor coming from that virtual ground once again, and both of those are going to be going into pin number 3 on our op amp. So I'm gonna grab a jumper wire, and I'm gonna hook this up to our emitter leg, which is that left leg again. And I'm going to just jump this over here. And then from this jumper, I'm going to take my 1UF cap and I'm going to drop it into pin number 3. So this is the positive leg and my negative leg is going into pin number 3. And then I also need a 10K resistor going into pin number 3. That is getting powered by the 4.5 volt virtual ground. So I have my 10K resistor in this pin number 3, and then over here I need to get that 4.5 volt virtual ground. So I'm going to make a jumper getting that reference voltage from this row right here. All right, so I just made this little jumper right here coming from the row with the 4.5 volts, and then this is going into our 10K resistor going into pin number 3. The next thing that we can add is a 47 PF cap across pins 1 and 2 on our op amp. My little 47 picofarad cap across pins number 1 and 2. Just like that. And then next I'm going to add our clipping diodes and then our overdrive pot and then this little tone section right here. So I'm going to start with our clipping diodes. So I'm going to add one jumper coming off of pin number 2. Then I'm going to add another jumper coming off of pin number 1. And what this is going to do is just give us a little bit more room to make all of those connections that we need to make across pins 1 and 2. So now I'm going to grab my clipping diodes and I'm going to arrange them in opposite directions so we get asymmetrical clipping in our clipping section. So making sure one leg is touching this jumper and the other leg is touching that jumper. And we want the diodes in opposite directions like I just mentioned. So something like that. The next thing I'm going to do is hook up this overdrive potentiometer coming off of pin 1, and this is going to go into our wiper lug, which is leg number 2. So coming off of pin 1, we need to go into lug number 2 of our overdrive potentiometer. And I'm just going to put my overdrive potentiometer over here, and I'm going to create a jumper from pin 1, which is, I can just use this right here. So this jumper is connected to pin 1. So I'm jumping from that point into my wiper. So this is going into my lug 2 of my potentiometer right here. And then I need a 51K resistor coming out of lug number 1 of our potentiometer. And the other side, or the other leg of our resistor is going to be touching pin number 2. So I'm going to get my resistor, and coming off of lug number 1, I'm going to be adding my resistor over here and then just dropping it into a new row. So this is connected to lug 1 of our potentiometer, and then this resistor I just dropped into a new row where there's no connections. And then I'm going to need another jumper to jump this over here. So this connection right here is connected through this jumper to pin number 2. So that is looking good so far. And the last thing that I need to do for this section is set up this 47 nanofarad cap with this 4.7K resistor in series going to ground. So the 47 nanofarad cap is touching pin number 2. So I'm going to find an open pin right there that's connected to that pin number 2 jumper. And I'm just going to drop it in like that. And then this other leg needs to be connected to ground through that 4.7K resistor. So here's my 4.7K resistor, and I'm just going to connect them together like that. So in this row, I have this leg of my 47 NF cap, and then it is touching my 4.7K resistor going to ground. So that's it for our gain and clipping section. One more section left. It's going to be our tone and volume section, and we're going to start with this 1K resistor coming out of pin number 1. I'm going to grab another jumper, and I'm going to connect it to my pin number 1 row. And I'm going to move it over here, about there. And coming off of this row, I'm going to add that 1K resistor going into pin number 5. Just like that. The next thing I'm going to do is add this 22 nanofarad capacitor going to ground, touching pin number 5.
Sure.
So in that same row as pin number 5, I added this 220 nanofarad capacitor going to ground. And then we need to add a 10K resistor coming from our virtual ground once again, going into pin number 5. So right here is my 4.5 volt virtual ground reference, and I'm going to just use another jumper to move it across my breadboard, something like that. So now this row has that 4.5 volts, and I'm going to grab my 10K resistor, and this is also going into pin number 5. 4.5 volts through my 10K resistor going into pin number 5. So the next thing we're going to do is add a 1K resistor that goes in between pins number 6 and number 7. We're just going to add it across those pins like this. So across pins 6 and 7, I just added that 1K resistor. And then now I'm going to add my 20K tone pot over here somewhere in my breadboard. And we're going to come off of pin number 6. We're going into lug number 3. And then coming off of lug number 1, we're going to be connected to pin number 5. So I'm going to grab my jumper here. And I said lug number 3 is going to be connected to pin number 6. And lug number 1 is going to be connected to pin number 5. I know it's getting a little bit crowded here. So lug number 3 goes to pin number 6 through this jumper, and then lug number 1 goes to pin number 5 through this jumper. Finally, we have to add this little RC filter right here. So we're going to do a 220 nanofarad cap with a 220 ohm resistor in series going to ground, coming off of our wiper lug number 2. So we're going to find our middle lug, and I'm going to drop this 220N resistor in that same row. Hopefully you can see that. And then I'm going to grab my 220 ohm resistor going to ground, making sure it's in that same row as that cap. There we go. So those legs are in the same row, and then this 220 ohm resistor is going to ground. Nearly there at this point. Next, we're going to add a 1 UF capacitor coming out of pin number 7 with a 1K resistor in series. I'm going to grab another jumper and find my pin number 7, which is right here. So this row is connected to my pin number 7, and I'm just going to move over here where I have a little bit of free space. Just making sure you drop this into a row where there's no existing connections. And then I'm going to add my 1 UF cap. Again, making sure not to put these legs in any row where there's already an existing connection. I'm going to add my volume pot right now, just so I know where we're going to be adding that 1K resistor. So right now, it's so close, but all of these legs aren't touching anything else, so I think we're in good shape. So coming off this 1 UF cap, I'm going to add this 1K resistor in series going into lug number 3 of our volume pot. So this leg of the resistor is touching this 1 UF cap, and then going into lug number 3 of our volume pot. Lug number 1 is going to be going to ground. So I'm just going to quickly add this jumper. So here's our jumper wire from ground into lug number 1. And then lug number 2, our wiper, is going to be connected to this 100 NF capacitor going to our output buffer. So that should finish our tone and volume section. And one thing that I just noticed is I didn't add this 100 nanofarad cap across pins 4 and 8. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. If I can get in here. So across pins number 8 and then 4. So I just added this 100 NF cap coming from pin 4 going into pin 8 right there. So the last thing that I'm going to do is hook up my guitar input. And then like I showed you earlier, the guitar input goes into this 22 NF cap right here. And then we already have our output buffer wired up. So fingers crossed this works. I'm going to go ahead and test it. If there's anything that I have to change about the circuit, I'll come back and let you know. Well, if you can believe it or not, we did it on the first try. So if you're following along, hopefully you don't have any issues with this circuit because it worked for me. I really hope you enjoyed this build and were able to follow along. And I think the only thing left to do is to hear this circuit in action.